Okay, continue. I just want to continue with this for a little bit, and then talk about the midterm. So there was a massive apparatus of collecting information under colonialism. They had to know who they were ruling. They gathered information, and they had, in fact, a class of administrators. Hi, 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 hi. Hello, hello. Please. Love to have your attention, please. If your phone is so important, you need to take it outside with you. My son has been making cartoons of people chained to their phones. He means his parents. It's terrible, but he's right. We are sitting at dinner with him and we tell him, no, you can't use your computer, only 2 hours per day or something, but we are always on the phone. It's bad parenting. Bad parenting. It's also a bad student thing. But you know, look, let me just unplug this. Back on now. So, we're talking about the collection of lots of information, the creation of knowledge, and in fact, the creation of a class of people, the in-between the rulers and the ruled. And there were schools built for these people, schools, and the Indian Civil Service exam, a very difficult exam that many people wanted to go for, because if you pass that exam, of course you had already to be from a good school and all of that, so it's for a certain class. You passed that exam, you had a job for life in the colonial system as a colonial writer. They're called writers in terms of writing culture, that their job was called writers. And in Bengal, they worked in the writers' building. They were writing information for the colony. So this is the thing, the economic exploitation system is directly supported by a knowledge and classification system. It's what we call knowledge power, which is a term from Foucault. But I'm more interested in the class of people who are the comprador class. So colonialism integrates some of the social strata of the old system into the colonial system. Largely, it was the Brahmanical class. They were the ones who were literate, right? They could write, so they became writers for the British. Now, it's not that they created this system, they mapped onto it. So that's what I was saying here as well. The British came to India and they mapped onto and exploited and then distorted an already existing system. The old system was a feudal system, and I'm not saying it's good. We don't want to go back to any feudal system. And it was a system of knowledge as well. The feudal lords had to know who they were governing. And there's also, right, think of Confucianism, there was the administration exam to become an official for the kings in Hui, the Hung kings or whoever, for the Wing kings. You needed to pass that exam. But this class that is created by the British is interesting because it creates contradictions in the system. And in fact, most revolutionary anti-colonial leaders come from that comprador class as well. If you think of Mao or Gandhi, even Ho Chi Minh, who comes from a family that was well educated, but Mao especially, his father had been through the administrative class system, and even Gandhi, he was a lawyer, trained in London, went to the bar in London, became a proper lawyer, worked in South Africa for many years. They are from this comprador class. So there's a contradiction built into this system. They created a class to do the administrative. They created a servant class, a comprador class, but some members, in creating that class, they also created their own opposition. The independence leaders, Nehru and so many others as well. Of course they did. The tribals, the subalterns, when they rose up, they were suppressed by military violence. The comprador class were already in a position that was somewhat exempt from that discipline. Or they could use the discipline against the system once they achieved mass support. How did they achieve mass support? Using information systems. They were skilled at using information systems. Gandhi, for example, writing a lot for newspapers, although often he would be banned from newspapers, but using radio. In fact, without radio, All India Radio, right? Gandhi's weekly broadcast from his the British. Funny, Hitler also would not have survived, would not have got Germany to fight without the radio as well. The radio can be good or bad. So we were talking about post-colonialism, but I wanted to think about the subject position of someone who is from this comprador class, the broker class, who then goes against the colonial power. What is the subject position of someone, of the members of the anti-colonial movement? They are anti-colonial, so they're against and outside of colonialism, but they are formed and they are able to be anti-colonial because of what colonialism gave them. Education, position, access to radio or newspapers. We need to think about this in terms of Ashish Nandi's concept of the intimate enemy. What do you think the intimate enemy will be? Can you tell me, not you, you know, what is the intimate enemy? Intimate enemy, what will that be in the context of what we're talking about? Yeah, you won't get it from, sorry. I've been talking about the enemy for quite a while. 5 minutes. So, okay, someone else. The intimate enemy. What do you think? Okay, what does intimate mean? Intimate means close, right? Cuddling. Okay, intimate is close, but an enemy that is close, what could that be? Think of All right, another concept for the same thing is double consciousness from Du Bois. From W.E.B. Du Bois, double consciousness. I think we all, especially you, have to have it. It's like at one level, you are Vietnamese. You have a responsibility and a culture, you think, to protect as well in some way your Vietnamese-ness, Vietnamese ways of doing things, ways of thinking. But you're also in Western education, speaking in English, or supposed to, and doing university studies and wearing the clothes of the university and blue jeans, the global uniform of youth. So you have two kind of consciousness. Du Bois meant this about African Americans, right? He talked about the soul of black folk. The soul of black folk was a folksy, southern African American culture of corn grits and song, jazz and gospel, and you know, the culture of the black in America. At the same time, they were trying to be citizens with all rights in America. Or they were African American, but they had an African background, but they were in the great Satan, they were in America itself. So they have a double consciousness, and they're competing or trying to negotiate to be both. Now, the intimate enemy is when you are Indian but trained in all of the ways of the colonizer, and you're against the colonizer for India, but you know that colonizer, you know their mind, their way of doing things, maybe even better than they know themselves, right? Because for the British, Salman Rushdie, the great, not so great lately, but used to be really great, novelist who wrote Midnight's Children, the greatest book. He used to say that the problem with the English people is that they don't know their history because it happened overseas. British history didn't happen in Britain. World War II was in Germany, World War I was in France, colonialism was in India, they were in the Americas, etc., etc. That's not exactly true, but it's interesting to think that the British think that what happens on their island was their history. Kings and queens and a couple of wars against the French, the Spanish Armada, and so on, which was won on the bowling greens of bowling greens of England. Sir Francis Drake, I've been to that bowling green. But it's wrong to think even British history like that, because you shouldn't think that colonialism only happened in the colonial location. Like French colonialism wasn't only in Indochina, or only in Indochina and Algeria and Guyana. It was also in Paris. Colonialism transformed the French too. And the English were completely, look what I said about the Industrial Revolution. Without colonialism, Europe would not be what Europe is. So to think that their history happened overseas is wrong as well, in a sense, but you can understand why they think that. But for you guys, your history happening right now is both in Vietnam and in the world. And that intimate enemy is the world consciousness. Your participation in global culture, which is equal to anyone in the world, also is negotiating with a demand you must feel to some degree about indigenous culture, Vietnamese culture, your ethnicity. And that's true for most people, though some less than others. Like Americans probably don't have that so much. Australians, well, you know, I'll tell you about Australian football some other time. And cricket, yeah, anyway. But the thing about India having the intimate enemies, Indians could say they knew British history more than the British. And then they could also say, well, Mahatma Gandhi, for example, he was asked this fantastic question. They said to him, Bapu, that's his nickname, Bapuji, Mahatma, what do you really think of European civilization? And he said, yes, that would be a good idea. Like, they don't have it yet. The idea of British being civilized, he would welcome that. In fact, the British talk about civilization, or the French talk about the mission civilisatrice, the civilizing mission, that they came out from Europe to civilize the world. But they came out to civilize people with swords and with guns and with brutality that was completely not civilized. Nothing civilized about war. So the Indian comprador could say they knew their master better than their master knew themselves. The master was in power, sure, but they could use this double consciousness, this intimate enemy, as a building block for getting rid of that, or achieving independence. Of course, there was support. There are other models to think about. We should talk about the Comintern, Lenin, and the workers' international movements, the Comintern and workers' aid, and also, of course, nationalism. I'm translating Dun Kak Men by Ho Chi Minh, 1927. He talks about using nationalism for revolutionary ends. I mean, there's a big debate about whether or not some of these elite figures from revolutionary movements were really just nationalists. Was Mao a greater Han nationalist or not? The use of national identity as a tool to build resistance is a part of that subject position of double consciousness. You become conscious of your debt or responsibility to the nation of your culture in the political context that you're now in, the nation of your nation. Of course, this is different when we think about global revolution, which Ho Chi Minh also talks about in Dong Kak Men. Very important towards the end that there's the capitalist revolution, the Bush. I included this only because I wanted to note the way in which decorative culture can also appropriate the tools of global commerce. This is a bank check, a note. Yeah, Bank of Indochine, Bank de Indochine for 100 piastres. But look at the decoration that the French bank has decided to use. It's yeah. This is a French bank here in colonial Vietnam, Annam, Cochin, and Tonkin. But look at what I'm pointing to is wanting to point out is the decorative, this is the French version of local culture, the decorative culture, decorative arts. But that's not the point anyway. Oh, I've already talked about Du Bois and double consciousness. I'm not sure the translation is Yitukep, Du Bois, double consciousness. I hope it conveys. But this is the point anyway. European colonialism created new classes, new bourgeoisies, new types of commercialized peasantries and urbanized working classes. And resistance was often expressed through nationalism. All right, it was tribalism. Smaller units were tribal, but nationalism. A national revolutionary struggle by the peasantry and the proletariat. And we need to see how colonialism created not only the intermediate comprador class, but also a proletarian class, a working class. I know, please. Created a proletarian class. We have a concept, you see them here, a whole class of people being forced into work, increasingly industrialized work, the creation of people employed for salary, and having increasingly nothing else to do but to sell their basic level skills to the highest bidder, which is the colonial power, for a wage. The creation of a waged class. Now, of course, the peasantry was always biggest in India and in Indochina. But there are theorists that Gledhill talks about who don't want to talk about class in the colonial context, or even to understand nationalism in terms of class. They rather focus on things like the really interesting book by Benedict Anderson, Imagined Communities. He's not saying that these nations were created. No, I'm talking, but I won't. When nations were created by only the economic, but that one part of the crucial unity, right, Gandhi with the radio, was the public culture that was sprung up around these classes. So, for example, without newspapers, without media, there would be no idea of the nation of India, or the independence movement of Congress and the Indian National Congress, it's called, or Indonesia. The idea that 13,000 islands could be one country needs something to glue it together. And the glue was media. It was not Dutch power. The Dutch could not have an army base or a ship on each island. There are 13,000 islands in Indonesia. So the Dutch colonial power could try and control Jakarta, Bandung, the centers. Batavia became Jakarta. Anderson's thing about ethnicity and identity created by the media and culture is really important, but yeah, there's an economic question that's missing. Gledhill also talks about James Scott and Weapons of the Weak. I don't want to completely dismiss Scott, but Gledhill also is with me on this. The idea that the downtrodden can use weapons against colonialism, like, for example, being lazy. Malinowski writes about this, actually. By using their absolute lack of power as a tactic to not participate in the wage economy. I can totally understand that. For example, Malinowski was asked to report once to a royal commission about why Papua New Guinean boys would not work all day diving for pearls. They would just work in the morning until they had enough to buy some tobacco, and then they would stop. Of course, they didn't want to save. They didn't want to buy a house. They didn't have any of those constructed desires of a worker. They just did what they did until they got what they wanted. And then why would they do this extra diving for the English guy, the Australian guy in that context? So Scott and Benedict Anderson, they make some assumptions. And there are assumptions built into the story of colonial contact and colonial critique, especially around the question of knowledge. And remembering this question, what was it that made anthropologists start to think about what they do? Why do we need anthropological knowledge? Why does the colonial system need to measure, to understand, to document, to have monographs in the library about all these different divisions of people? Well, because group, individual, or organization, to govern, you need knowledge. So the anthropologists started to work out this question was, well, who are we working for? We are working for the colonial power. As you'll see in 2 weeks' time, when we talk about ethics and Condominus's work, he didn't think that he was working for the colonial power. He didn't think that he was working for the CIA. He was just trying to write the truth about the Jarai in the Central Highlands. But that book became useful for the colonial power. And so many anthropologists started to realize that they had always been, in the phrase they use is the handmaiden of anthropology as the handmaiden of colonialism. I think it's in the book by Talal Asad. What is a handmaiden of colonialism? What is a handmaiden? Yes, you? Yes? Yes, you. Only you. A handmaiden of colonialism. Forget. A handmaiden is someone, right, in those books like Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights, or Jane Eyre, or Possession, when a man possessed of a fortune is in want of a wife, or the wife gets hold of the fortune, she will then have servants. And in order to dress nicely in the 19th century bourgeois way, she will have, especially if she's like very upper class or a princess or something, she will have a handmaiden, a servant to help her get dressed. This is what the informant, the intermediate class, the comprador class were. They were the handmaidens of colonialism. And in fact, it turns out that anthropologists were also like that. Anthropologists were doing work to make it look like the civilizing mission of the colonial powers was well dressed, was really an honest project, collecting knowledge for knowledge's sake. And it wasn't. So that's why next, in 2 weeks' time, we talk about the ethics of anthropology. Now, fieldwork could only go on because of colonialism. So how can you answer this question? Why did anthropology get reflexive? Why did anthropologists turn around to think about themselves? Partly because they recognized that they were the handmaidens of colonialism. They were helping colonialism. But also, they had previously been able to do fieldwork because of colonialism. And now, the independence movements were ending colonialism and kicking anthropologists out along with all the other Europeans. The anthropologists were running away because it became difficult for an American to do fieldwork in Indonesia without everyone saying CIA or colonial lackey, out European, out white man. So anthropologists made the best of it and started to look at themselves. It was like pathetic. A reflection that really didn't honestly grapple with the politics of this, but looked mostly at writing, looked at their work as an art form, about being in the shelf, rather than avoiding the other story of colonial politics. Oh, okay. This is the thing, writing ethnography, writing anthropology was about being on the shelf, but the shelf is part of the institution. The institution is not apolitical. It's a part of the knowledge system, the surveillance system, the global system of colonialism. So we have to understand it like that. Actually, I don't think that John Gledhill does really like that, but he gets close. He goes through a whole number of names of different theories, though, so it's worth reading his book just to know. Here are some actually that I wanted to talk about that I left out. What I want you to do when you read Gledhill's book or something, you come across a name, find out who that person is. Do a quick look. So, Antonio Gramsci, I already told you, communist, Italian, theorist of hegemony. Edward Said I didn't mention, but his book, Orientalism, is really important. He's anti-Marx, but here's a critique of the way in which the West always described the East as either demonic, Arabic, or Oriental, or decadent, Arab or Oriental. There were like two tropes, bad despot and decadent. Really important and influential book. It came out in 1987, I think. Derrida, I already mentioned. James Scott, I mentioned. Peter Worsley, I'm working up I want to do a whole lecture on Peter Worsley, but not in this course now. Next year, maybe. Peter Worsley did stuff on cargo cults. That's the recognition by Papua New Guinea people that aeroplanes would bring lots of products to the colonial masters. And it would seem like just magically these things would come from the sky. Planes full of food and radios and equipment. And so they believed that if they were good to their ancestors, they too would get cargo. And they built a religious system around the prophecy of getting cargo in the same way, getting commodities in the same way that Europeans got them, just out of the sky in a plane. Tal al-Assad, I've mentioned, Anthropology and the Colonial Account. Eric Wolf, he wrote about people without history, so sort of expanding on Levi-Strauss's work. Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. This is the backstory for the film of Apocalypse Now. But it's about going up the Niger River in Africa, Lagos, and confronting the other. Right? So it's, you okay? A bit worrying. Confronting the other and experiencing the horror of cultural difference. Emmanuel Wallerstein, Benedict Anderson I've mentioned, Emmanuel Wallerstein, World Systems, very influential on Talal Assad, who's the guy who talked about post-colonialism with Spivak. I listed these names because for your midterm and for your final, these kind of names getting mentioned are important. So now I'm going to talk to you about your midterm and your final. Where is it? All right, first up I want to say for the weekly reading assessment, look, 9 and 7, that's what's been handed in. So 9 up until last night about midnight, I'd marked. 16, but 35 have not. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So at least 7 of you in this room, at least, have not done it. And there are about 10 or 12 readings for this course. You need to do them all, and you will get an average mark, and that will go into the 30% that is your process mark. So if you're not doing this, understand me well. If you're not doing these, you have very little chance of passing this course. But 30% is a big chunk to throw away. "35 people have not done it." That means 35 people will lose 30% of their mark if they don't do it. Every week. Which I mean is about 3% each time. But, you know, you can work out the odds. If you don't do them, you're risking your degree. I'd be very happy to see you again next year. Don't worry. Next year, I promise we also talk about Peter Worsley. So come back. Yes. Do the work then. Okay, midterm. So you can see already the midterm is up, due October 14. That's like ages away. But not really, because you need to do a lot of reading before then. I want you to make an essay plan and an essay in this course. That's your midterm and your final. They are related. So, the trick here is to think of all the names of anthropologists that I mentioned. It could be someone like Talal Assad. It could be Edward Said. It could be Malinowski, Levi Strauss, Georges Bataille, Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, Kathleen Goff, George Condominas. So many. Choose one and read everything you can of them. You read everything you can of them. I should be presenting it, should I? Sorry. Okay. And here's the question. How did the person you choose, let's say you choose Levi-Strauss, how does Levi-Strauss do his research? What was his methodology? So I want you to read and learn what one anthropologist, in real good detail, like read everything about them, or read everything by them that you can get hold of. Read deeply into one person. The course is an overview of anthropology, sure, but I also want you to go deeply into at least one anthropologist and really get to know how that person thinks. And then, at the end of your assignment, imagine yourself as that person and choose something and write about how you would study it. I don't want you to do the study. Okay, let's say you choose Levi-Strauss and your topic, what's your favorite? Who is it? X? What you're most interested in right now? Okay, disaster. All right, so how would Levi-Strauss approach disaster? So what you need to do is make an essay for it, but the midterm will be a plan. How will Levi-Strauss approach the end of the world? Right? How will he approach the end of the world? Disasters, environmental, economic, and so on. Now you need to read your way into Levi-Strauss's method. So in your brainstorming section, make a mind map, but please not on a computer, just scribble the words. Doesn't need to be so neat. Last year, well, for the culture course, I can't remember where it was, some people did it like as perfectly designed diagrams that could be in a museum. Waste of your energy. Just scribble down the ideas. Method of Levi-Strauss. Structuralism. So how do you do structuralism of disasters? You're going to have to look at media, film, press, representations of disasters and of the world. How does Levi-Strauss study the world? Through these are like equal myths. And he's going to look for a structure in the myths of disaster in the world. How does he collect information? How does he collect information? So yeah, he works on the archive. Newspaper records or YouTube films. Okay, so you do a kind of brainstorm. How will your anthropologist work on disasters? And then you can put it into the plot. What will be, always think about this, what will be wrong with approaching them in this way? The problem with the method of structuralism is often that it signifies nothing. It's often very complex, but so what? So now, the critique of structuralism is that it shows a very good analysis, say of Cinderella or of a story, but in the end, so what? Now, if you have a very good structuralist analysis of the media representation of disaster, what are you going to do with it? So what to do could be your last section. Structural analysis, collecting material. So you will say Levi-Strauss works on the archive. Levi-Strauss collects the archive. I'm going to use YouTube videos of disaster movies, etc., etc. Now here's my structural analysis. Nearly all of them, all the disaster movies, have one hero who has to reconcile with his father to save the world. And usually it's Bruce Willis, nearly always. So they have a structure, you can do a structural analysis, and then what to do with this? Well, this is, so you have an argument development, summarize, talk about, this is how Levi-Strauss will approach the end of the world. Of course, you do it more complicated than that, but that's the principle. Now, the midterm should be just these 2 pages. Handwritten. You don't need to put it on computer. Don't give me some beautifully designed thing. That's not necessary. The final will be when you write up this essay into an argued, proper 2,000 word, 2,500 word essay. And that's due in December 10 or something like that. No, I don't know when it is. Sometime in December. I think we finish at the end of November, and then it's a week and a bit, like 10 days after the last class. So there's plenty of time. Now you see on this assignment, underneath there's already discussion. You can discuss topics with me on this page here. You see here, the task is really 3 parts. Get to know an anthropologist well, number 1. Understand what they did as research and think of how this research might inform something you might do. The thing is, I don't want you to do the research, just to think about what it would be like to be the anthropologist doing it, right? Next year, you can take a year off school and go and do this project because you're independently wealthy and you suddenly win the lotto or something. The project should be bigger. Imagine how you will spend your life as this anthropologist doing work on, I don't know, what's your favorite topic right now? Listen up. Shh. Colonialism. Good choice. So, okay. And let's say you choose that you want to do visual anthropology, Sarah Pink. Colonialism and visual. So what is the imagery? What is the representations that Sarah Pink will study? In what way will Sarah Pink study images of colonialism? I know her a bit well, so I know what she's like. She will look at advertising. She'll look at black fashion. And she'll probably look at architecture. So you might think, okay, how does she look at these things? What's her method? She collects images. And she often engages, her method in particular, she often engages in some visual making project to generate. So she might get people from the black community to discuss advertisements and write about that, or to take photographs of colonial architecture, or she might look at fashion shoots in colonial architecture, because that's a thing. That's a really big thing, how You see it if you go to Hoi An, where the beautiful old temple ruins and architecture is there. Nearly every time I've been, there's been some fashion shoot there they're wearing weird postmodern clothes, not anything like traditional, but always the backdrop is the old Hoi An temple architecture and things. So what is the role, what is the relationship between fashion shoots and architecture might be her theme. So your question might be, how do we look at colonialism? Using Sarah Pink. Fashion, architecture. But you might need an extra box here to be about project that she sets up of getting black models to reflexively photograph where they are. Their backgrounds. And then you could talk about the questions that Sarah Pink raises, which is like, how do the participants in contemporary colonialism understand their own history? How can you get them, people who work in photography, to learn something from anthropology? All right, so much more complicated than this, but a mind map piece, handwritten, not typed, and a plan with lots of detail of what your examples will be. Okay, this should be probably a page, 400 words or so. That's your midterm. When it comes to the essay, you need to be really reading Sarah Pink in detail, or Levi-Strauss, or George Bataille, or Margaret Mead, or whoever, reading that. And I can help you get that material. You need to search for it first, but if you don't find any, we'll help you. But the places to search: Google, Scholar. Give up on Google. That gives you just the disease that is the mind of all of humanity. Google Scholar is more careful. You can even get an extension on your Chrome browser, if you use that on a desktop, that will link to all the things that you can actually download for free. That's a really good extension to get. The other one, of course, is Book for You. Bookforyou.org, you have to sign up, but it doesn't cost anything if you only take 10 books per day. But you can find about 80% of all books. The only ones that aren't really there are anything in the last 5 years, even just 2 years. But nearly everything is there. Then Google Books will often have, about 50% of all books are free as PDFs on Google Books. Or Scribd. Scribd is when you can get a 1 month trial, but you have to give a credit card and then pull back before 1 month, right? Otherwise they charge you $5.99 per month. Oh, and the best thing for journal articles, 100% of journal articles can be got from Sci-Hub. If you have a DOI number, and all journal articles must have a 10-digit DOI, 10 digits, you put that into Sci-Hub, and most of the time it's up. Sometimes they close it down because the companies like Elsevier, the manager of Elsevier earns £6 million per year. They really hate Sci-Hub because Sci-Hub is in Russia and it's free. But you can get nearly every article that's been in any journal. Absolutely fantastic resource. If at all Sci-Hub stops working, because Sci-Hub often stops working just before exams. Wonder why? Because suddenly students are downloading things. There are some other mirror sites. You go on Twitter and you find the mirror sites. Okay, any question about the midterm? Midterm is worth 20. 20% is the midterm. Yeah, 30% is for the process, the readings, weekly readings. Any questions? My pleasure to discuss. Please discuss on the Google Classroom, on the stream, sailing down the stream, and submit on Google. Turn it in, or turned in, or whatever it's called. 14 October. It says on the Google stream. It should be more detailed than this, but this just gives an idea. Yeah, it both. She does ethnography of fashion. All right, thank you very much. See you. Okay. You done? No worries. Thank you. See you.